to Behind the Mask. I'm EJ and Lori and T are here today so we can talk about episode 46, The Masks of Culture and Genetics. Again, just a friendly reminder that anything discussed in this podcast is not to be used as a diagnosis or a replacement for conversations with your own doctors, therapists, psychologists, or other medical professionals. As I said in the title, we're talking about culture and genetics, the whole nature versus nurture type of experiences. This is all going to be regarding personalities. We're talking, we say nature is more of what you're born with, your genetics, the study of heredity, and the variation of inherited characteristics. I look like a spitting image of both my parents put together, so something like that. And then nurture, what we're taught, what we observe, what we grow up with, is your culture, customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social group. So this could be the church you grew up in or the church you're attending. There's a culture among them. There's Lori and I work, we're a part of the same church body, so we have a similar culture in that way. So then when I moved over here, I was very familiar with some of the ways they did things, so I wasn't as unfamiliar with it. Also the way I grew up, I'm myself, I did want to disclaimer again too, Lori, T and I, if you don't watch the YouTube videos, we are 3 white women. So but we all have our own cultures and things that we grew up with. My last name is Danish. I grew up in a very Scandinavian-esque house. So I have a lot of those tendencies still. My dad was a farm boy, so there's a lot of that, and it doesn't have to be where you're from, it's how you were raised. My dad was raised as a farm boy from central Minnesota, so that's what he passed on to me. And then my mom was from the area that I grew up in, and so those two came together and had me, and I've got a lot of different ways of being nurtured throughout my life. But then I also again have the genetics that I was born with. And then we think about the 2 songs that we were talking about was We're Born This Way by Lady Gaga, and then This Is Me from The Greatest Showman. Those are 2 amazing songs that kind of talk about that. They're really powerful.
I love those songs.
Yeah.
Both of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, because I'm adopted, I don't really know a lot about my genetics. I don't know if I'm the spitting image of my parents, my biological ones. And so I do have a blood sister who I was adopted with, and we have throughout our lives, we let each other know, hey, I just got diagnosed with diabetes, hey, we both went through the same kind of uterine cancer. Both had to have hysterectomies, her even earlier than I did, unfortunately, before she could have children. So she's adopted 2 adorable young women now. They're not children anymore. But 2 adorable young ladies. And, she has done a little more research, I believe, with the genetic side of our family, but it's not something that, for many reasons, I really wanted to be a part of. I don't know, I just really didn't have a desire. And I've kind of I grew comfortable a long time ago. The doctors are like, well, do you know about this or do you know about that? I'm like, nope, just run the test. We'll see what comes up, I'm totally comfortable with that. But as I've gone through some of this emotional journey, and through, just getting behind those masks and working on these things, I'm getting more comfortable with the idea of And I've really kind of been pushed a little bit lovingly by my eldest son, who really is just fascinated with the idea of genetics. Um, and it took me a while to come to this place where I could be comfortable with it, with him. And so I don't know what I'm going to do with that, but I know that I'm more open to it. I've actually even thought about doing one of those genetic test things, 23andMe or the ancestry.com, which is such a very different place for me because for most of my life, I wanted nothing to do with that.
Right.
I just wanted to pretend that I believed more in science and I came from some burst of energy in the world, and I didn't actually come from two human beings. So just the idea that I'm even getting comfortable talking about genetics is like huge.
Yeah.
So I've having said that, I've always kind of been more into culture, nurture versus, nature, and definitely my stepdad, adoptive stepdad, was a Minnesota farm boy, which is one of the ways that EJ and I connected so well.
Yeah.
I happened to come up in a conversation early on in our relationship. We realized that every summer, or many of our summers, we went to Minnesota, not knowing each other, different parts of Minnesota. You're a little more mid to northern, and
Yeah.
my dad's family is southern Minnesota, right off the Iowa border.
Yeah.
But little colloquialisms, things that we would say.
You have it more than I do. Sometimes you'll say about, and you'll have that like Minnesota thing. And you said, "Don't you know?" a few times. I don't do that. I didn't grow up with that much, but you said it a few times, and I was like, okay, there's the Minnesota in you.
There's the Minnesotan in there. I can't get it out. I don't know why. It's very weird.
And again, you said something that was an adopted trait. That wasn't something you had a genetic for.
No.
But because your culture of where you were raised is how that is impacted some of the phrases you use.
Yes, all of my aunts and uncles and family, we would go, and there was just this heavy accented speech that I just gravitated to, and I loved it. And it comes out at the strangest times. When I'm not, especially when I'm not really aware of it, it'll just sneak out there. So anyway, I think this topic shall be fun, and I look forward to diving into it some more.
Yeah.
What about you, T?
Well, for me, it's interesting. I look at the two sides of my family. From one side of the family, I'm actually only second generation American because my grandmother moved here from Norway when she was 14, right after the Second World War. And she was very much impacted by the World War II and the German invasion into Norway and all the things that the family went through during that. And then when she moved here, she spent a lifetime of trying to get rid of her accent and anything that identified her as anything but straight up American. And so I have that on one side, and then on the other side, a very different kind of family. So, you had they were both what would be considered blue collar, but on my Norwegian side, it was a lot of construction workers and stuff like that. And then we moved all over the States, so I have a lot of that impact too. But and then on my other side of the family are a different kind of blue collar, definitely scrappers, and often we're referred to as white trash. And so, I had both influences in my life growing up. So how that affected me came out in different ways. As far as genetics go, as a therapist, I believe nature versus nurture is equal. So people are born with a certain level, types like basic types of personality. You get babies who are more highly sensitive and cry more. Babies who are able to self-soothe more. You can watch these kids grow up, and they'll be more, you know, one group might be a little bit more naturally empathic, another group might be more naturally aggressive, and then you add in that nurture part. And I think nurture can come from a lot of different places, not just our families and parents, but also our schools. And as we get older, our places of employments and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and like Lori was saying, like, you know, Minnesota farm boy, and for me, a lot of it too was a self-sufficiency, which Lori has learned a lot about recently. But there wasn't a, you know, store 5 minutes down the road. Like, you had to drive. Their farm was not that far from town, but it was far enough that you couldn't just hop in the car and go when you needed something. So there was a lot of, you know, you learned how to fix things. So my dad kind of translated that to me as he got like into the house, was if something broke in the house, he would fix it. If it didn't work still, then we would have to call in a repairman. But there barely ever came a repair person into our house. Like, I think maybe one time for a refrigerator, because it had to deal with the cooling system of the refrigerator, and we ended up having to get a new one because that's the freon gas in there is just too dangerous to deal with.
Mm.
But there was no repair people coming into the house. My dad would like work on it for 3 weeks just to fix it, just so somebody wouldn't have to come in. So for me, it's like, I hate asking for help. I feel like I can do it myself, or I can learn how to do it myself. I hate spending money on things like that. But we had family dinners, and my mom and dad were definitely introverted. So I think that's where I get a lot of my introversion. You know, my dad definitely, and my mom more so. And then we had another kind of cultural experience because we had 3 generations in one household. Because a year after my parents got married, my mom's mom moved in with them. And for 4 years, they lived without me. And then I was born. And then my grandmother lived with us until I was about 14 or 15. And that was a very interesting experience because she grew up in the 20s, 30s, and served in World War II as a WAC, Women's Auxiliary Corps. And she was very pro, like, girls should be learning history and English and should be knowing how to do laundry and knowing, you know, the sewing and all of those hobbies and cooking. And I was the not that. I loved math and science growing up. So there was definitely a lot of like personality clashing with that. A lot of arguments. Even my dad and her did not get along. And he wanted me raised. I remember growing up, I remember hearing my dad say, don't talk to her like a baby. She's not a baby, or something like that. And it was, you know, like when kids are real young, you know, parents will often like their voice will change, or they'll talk kind of goo talk. He didn't want that for me. He wanted me to be treated and raised in like, talk to her like a human, you know, don't just talk to her like she's a baby. And I think that's part of how my maturity shifted a lot sooner. I'm grateful for what I learned, and I'm grateful for the things he taught me, because he taught me how to change oil. He taught me how to change tires. You know, gardening, he loved gardening. So I learned a lot about that. So I'm really glad I had those times. But now, like, I've kind of found my boundaries of like, I can fix that, but I'm calling in the professionals on that one, you know? Yeah, so.
Yeah. I'm not close with my dad, right, you know, at this time in my life. And there are probably, you know, a lot of questions, especially now that I'm an adult, that if I had a better relationship with my dad, I'd love to ask why we did things the way we did.
Mhm.
So I can only assume or reflect back on, you know, um, I don't, I think that my dad, although he was in construction and, you know, but he was the head of his own company and very well respected in the community. He, I think that although my dad could have probably fixed those things,
Yeah.
for whatever reason, that wasn't going to be what he would do. We would just hire someone to do that. So in that way, I grew up in a very different household than you did, EJ.
Yeah.
We had gardeners and people that did all of those things. And then, you know, I did grow up very much influenced by my grandmothers. My grandmothers were so influential, and praise God for that, because they provided the nurturing and the love and the things that every child needs. Because I definitely wouldn't have gotten that otherwise. So I feel like God gave me these amazing grandmothers who were able to love me and meet me where I was at and nurture and yes, make me a girly girl. I do, you know,
Trying not to say that.
I like my jewelry and my, you know, I'm not really huge into makeup. I've never been, mostly because I'm a California girl and I lived most of my life outside in the sun and makeup would just melt all over anyway. So, you know, I've just kind of always been a lip gloss and sometimes some lip liner and eyeliner if I'm going to dress it up, you know, and a little mascara. But I like to dress up and I like to dance and I like to go out and I love romance and, you know, I like that girly stuff.
What were we talking about the other day? And you said, go do something, or there was something you said, and I said, no, that's girly.
I,
I don't even remember what it was. I was like, yeah.
but at the same time, I love sports.
Right.
I feel like I'm a dichotomy, you know, because I love my sports, man. My mom would say, young ladies don't sweat, they glisten. And I'm like, no, mom, I'm sweating. I just got off the track, you know, I just got off the volleyball court. I just, you know, no,
Right.
I'm sweating. She hated that. But so I felt like for me, but I don't know. Okay. I'm sure I could watch your YouTube university and intelligently figure out how to change a tire, but it's not really something that I know how to do. My second husband, oh gosh, he very ridiculously thought that I could, I think he asked me to fill the window washer fluid. But I think I filled the radiator. I don't even know what I filled. Anyway, I'm not that kind of person. That is not, no, I am the typical.
Note to self: do not let Lori touch anything in the car.
No, don't let me touch anything on your car. I know. I don't change tires. I barely know where the gas in the car goes.
Well, that's at least you put gas in the car and not diesel.
Yes. I can put gas in the car and I know how to do that, but I really like that's just not my strength for sure. And nowhere in my growing up did I get nurtured that way.
Right.
I was definitely supposed to be a young lady. I almost felt like a little princess sometimes more than just even a little girl. So
Yeah, I forgot about the sports.
yes.
Yeah, I learned a lot. I learned to kind of love sports from my dad. I couldn't play a lot of them. I played football and soccer and stuff with my friends in the driveway and in the road, growing up, because you could do that. Kids went outside when I was growing up. We went outside and played in the outside world, and we drank from hoses, in the summer.
Yep.
Just saying,
Yep.
I've seen that TikTok running around, everybody's talking about it. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So I definitely feel like even though we both had dads, that they responded differently with how they raised us. And it's definitely changed how we are and changed our perspectives and the way that we view the world and are in the world. And yeah.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about the cultural kind of aspects of our growing up. For genetics, more inherited stuff. My mom and I share a lot of personality traits because we spent a lot of time together. She was my best friend. I'm an only child, so there was that. And then, but I didn't know my mom was afraid of heights until I was in my 20s. And as I learned that, it then made sense why she never wanted to go on a roller coaster with me, why she never wanted to do any of the rides at any kind of fair that involved heights. And it was when she had just gone through a good health checkup from her cancer. And I think it's 2012, and it was a summer, and I was like, let's go to the space needle. We have nothing to do today. And she came up with every excuse, and she finally said the reason why she doesn't want to go is because she's afraid of heights and didn't want to go up in the space needle because we had to go to Seattle for the appointment. So yeah, that was it. And then my dad joined the Navy after he graduated high school. Was in for a few years, came back to his hometown area, lived for a few more years, then went back in the Navy for a few more years, and chose to not return to Minnesota after his second stint in the Navy. He stayed where he got out, which is where he met my mom, and they chose to stay here. I think he was the youngest son of a family of quite a few kids, and he was the cool uncle. And I think he just wanted some distance from his family. I love his family. I wish I would have had more time with them growing up than just a few weeks every summer. But I'm grateful that now I get to use social media and stuff to keep in touch with some of my family members that are still with us, and kind of build a relationship with them now that he's passed and my mom has passed. And then also, both my mom and dad had health challenges that I'm having to keep an eye on. My dad very unexpectedly died of kidney failure a couple of years ago. My mom had cancer. Her mom had cancer. My mom's brother had cancer. And my dad had a hereditary disease in his bone structure in his feet, I guess, that changed the bone structure. So that's something I have to keep an eye on. And so growing up, like, my dad had such terrible problems with his feet that he's like, on my mom, the minute like my shoes started to like get worn down, he's like, okay, get her a new pair of shoes. Like, because he didn't want me to go through the same feet problems he was having, because we didn't know until like I was an adult really what was wrong with his feet and why he was having so many problems. It was because the bone structure in his foot was kind of changing. So yeah, so and then my mom, when she got pregnant with me, got diabetes and never lost it. So that's something I have to keep an eye on too. Praise God that I've been able to maintain or keep really low on that. And, they check me every once in a while to make sure that, but those are like things I've had to hereditarily keep an eye on. And I know I think you said one of the last episodes that, your kids now have to say that they have a history of heart problems in your family because you've had a heart attack when you were younger.
I got to start something.
But yeah, so those are a few with me.
So another area that we see genetics or heredity, but that's an awkward word. But anyway, come into play is mental health. So there are a lot of mental health disorders that are there are genetic components, including depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia. Matter of fact, if one person in a family has bipolar, if you look, there likely is someone else who has schizophrenia. We're seeing a link between the two showing up in families. So it is, so there is that component too. And then you add on top of that, okay, so let's say you have a parent that's depressed. Well, now you're more likely to become depressed, but then you're raised with the depressed parent. So now you have nurture on top of it. So I often explain to people how it works is imagine two empty glasses sitting in front of you, and let's pour in half a glass of liquid, and that's what you're born with genetically. So let's say depression, that's what you're born with genetically. The next glass is only a quarter full, and that's someone else and their genetics and for depression. Then you add in life experiences like how you're raised, things that go on that happen to you. Well, the person whose glass is already half full is going to take a lot less to spill them over into a quote unquote disorder. Whereas someone who's only born with a quarter glass of that genetics can take and respond to life circumstances and takes a lot more to overfill their cup into a disorder.
Interesting. Wow. I haven't really thought about it that way.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah. Like I said, I don't know a lot of my genetic past. I can surmise certain things with my boys or my sister. But
When your older son do that test, didn't it break down some of his things that they thought might come from you, like your side of?
yeah, there was a few things on there. So I'll have to, look into it more. And at least now I'm open to looking into it more. I remember when he came to me, it's like, Mom, if I do this, are you okay with this? Or can I talk with you about this? Or it's like, yes, I'm in a whole different place. I'm totally fine, But I remember my biological sister, she came to me, she asked me years ago, and I was like, absolutely not. I want nothing to do with it. Don't talk to me about it. I just really wanted nothing to do with the genetic side. But much more open now. And I loved the metaphor, the illustration that you gave us. It really does make sense. But I think what I've really enjoyed is knowing that, with the nurturing side, I've been, both myself and my boys have really been working on being cycle breakers, because we didn't want to keep some of those tendencies going. We didn't want to just let nature take its course in that way and overfill and overflow that cup with different things. And so we've really worked hard as a family to deal with some of those things healthily, and with some more foreknowledge, I guess, and some insight and discernment, and really trying to work on breaking those cyclical, genetical, even cultural things that get passed on. We've really tried to say, okay, let's embrace the things that we want and keep them and have traditions and, but those things that are not healthy, that are not a way that we want to move forward generationally, we're trying to change those things.
Right.
And not fix them, but make them to be something healthier, something we want or could be proud of, or could just really be you know, our generation's legacy for the next one. You know, that's what we're trying to work on a lot. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this. My dad having vehicles was a sign of wealth to my dad. So there wasn't a get a car, trade it in every couple of years, get a new one. It was get one, keep it in the garage, never use it, then go get another car. And then, get another car. And then, I remember in 1983, when I was born, he bought a Dodge Rampage that sat in our garage. I finally got him to get rid of it and trade it in on a vehicle in like the early 2000s. And it only had like 7,000 miles on it. And it was brand new when we got it. When he got it, he wanted to keep it. And then when I got my first vehicle, that sat in the garage for another 20 years, like after I stopped using it, because I had a job and I bought my own car. I'm like, I'm not gonna do that. I have one vehicle right now, and I traded my SUV in on the current car I have right now. And a few, hopefully in the next year or so, I'll have some more income to where I could possibly trade it in on a little better car. But my gosh, growing up, I'm trying to break that cycle because I don't want to have 4 cars sitting in my driveway collecting dust because I'm not going to use them. Like it's one thing to have like for some people who commute a lot, like it's one thing to have like a small commuter car with good gas mileage, and then have maybe like a truck for like bigger jobs if you live in an area where you need that. But a basic SUV, especially if you can get like a hybrid SUV, is a pretty like universal vehicle. And I'm like, that's my goal, is to have something universal that I can like do some work in, but I can also like travel in. So I'm breaking that cycle. I'm like, sorry, Dad, I'm not going to keep 4 vehicles sitting around here. Yeah, it's just, yeah. And
Earth thanks you.
right, especially because I'm trying to get a hybrid, because I don't want to deal with that. But, I think about the Chain Breakers. Like there's that song, it's a Christian song, Break Every Chain.
Yes. I love that.
And it's
song.
like, it's because, you're carrying around these chains of like the weight of your past, and God is helping you break those chains. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about here too, is we're breaking those cycles because, but again, like in our last episode, there are positives to things we've learned. Like, so everything we talked about that may be positive or negative. Like, I love what I learned. Like, I love the experiences I had from my dad with all of that stuff, like taking care of the car and learning how to garden and learning how to be like that kind of person. So there's positives out of that, but then there's also stuff I had to like, okay, step back and say, like, I learned that, great, but what am I going to do differently? He also didn't like the idea of ever renting an apartment. It was, oh, you got to buy a house. I'm like, no, not. It's just no. So yeah, so I feel like we're being the chain breakers by doing our own thing, but also honoring what we learned and where our past brought us to.
T, can you address some of that as we move into the second, segment, if you will? How do we do that?
I think EJ, started right where, or left off right where I would start on that, and that's what works for you, what doesn't. The whole "don't fix it if it ain't broke" concept. I'm really
Love
on
that
that right
concept.
now, apparently.
Yeah.
But it's also the other cliche term I like to use is aces in their places. So putting things, if it works, great, keep building on that, and you have to determine that for yourself. Like, if you were to walk into my house, it's not like state of the art stuff or brand new stuff. I very rarely have brand new stuff, but I like it. And I taught my kids, take care of what you have. So, you know, and by doing that, you have an appreciation for it.
Right.
Was my goal. That was what I wanted to pass on to my kids, is an appreciation for the things that you have, and you show that by taking care of it. And by taking care of it, you have some self-sufficiency, like you can take care of things yourself. I've torn apart washing machines before you do, mind you. Someone had given us a free washer and dryer, and they gave it to us because it wasn't wringing out the clothes. And so the clothes were sopping wet. And I had no idea. I knew nothing about it. Again, YouTube was not around at the time.
Right.
Internet was barely a thing. It might not even been quite a thing yet. Yeah, actually, I don't think it was quite a thing. It was getting there. So I took the washer apart and I just looked to see what I could see. And as I took the barrel out, I looked down at the bottom and saw a loose bolt that wasn't as long as the others. So I took one of the other bolts. And I went down to the hardware store. I was like, "Do you have this bolt?" And they're like, "Yes." And so I got that, and I found where there was a missing spot for a bolt. Put that in. I had a brand new set of washer and dryers for 25 cents. Is all that bolt cost me.
You continue to amaze me. Oh my gosh. I've just washed them by hand and said, forget it.
Well, and I've had to do that before too. You just, you know,
Right.
innovation comes from necessity, right?
Amen.
We invent things because we have a need for something, a way to make our life easier or do this. So we're fully capable of doing that, each one
Right.
of us individually to some degree or other. And again, it's aces in your places. If I wouldn't have felt like I could do that, then I might have asked someone else, like, "Hey, what do you know? Can you,
That I would have.
right?" So there's different ways to get your needs met, but the fact of the matter
Right.
is having the confidence to figure that out. But I think a lot of what I see happening is people get defeated before they even start.
Right.
Yes, that is very, very sadly true. You know,
And I think that's
yeah,
something in our culture as a whole that that is happening. We're losing the ability to take care of ourselves and relying on others to do it for us. Uh, and so that's something that I'm hoping that part of our culture doesn't uh, come into my family's culture.
Right.
so let's talk about that. So, I mentioned that my boys and we kind of view ourselves as cycle breakers. Um, we we definitely, with prayer, with discernment, family discussion, we say, okay, well, if we don't like this, what do we want? What do we like?
Right.
And then we go set about making that happen. Um, we try to keep the things we do like, um, Christmas traditions or Easter things, or, just um, parts of our family that we do love, and we try to
Right.
keep those things. But in a positive way forward, then we try to work together to come up with a new plan or a new way to do something, um, so that we can, move forward healthily. And I think we've all talked about that in different ways. So how else can we engage in some of that? What do you think?
Identifying what's important to you, to your family. Um, what are your long-term goals? What is your why? I I know that's
I
another
like
one I
that.
bring up a lot. What is your why? Why are you, are you wanting the change just because um, the Joneses are doing it?
Ah,
Right.
Or do you want the change because that's what's going to get you and your family, etc., to your goal?
I like that. I like that.
Yeah, I feel like definitely keeping the things that work and letting go of the stuff that's not working. Because things that worked 20 years ago, it's different now. Things are easier, maybe of X, Y, and Z, or I'm all for asking for help after I've tried or attempted to consider if I can fix this. And I know where my limits are. I'm not going to touch a washer and a dryer, or a refrigerator, or freezer. Those are just, I'm like, no, we got to ask for help with that. But, if it's a faucet that's leaking, I can fix that. I can tighten up, get a wrench and do that. But I also feel like this world now has become so consumer driven that things are not made to last anymore, because it's so much easier to just get rid of them after a few years because it's broken and get a new one than it is to keep something. I mean, when I moved out of my family home, the couches that we'd had my entire life were still there. And my parents got them used in like the early 80s, and they were still as good as new. But couches nowadays, you're lucky if they last 3 or 4 years. So I don't know. I like having to like keep stuff and hold on to things, because I feel like if you take care of them, like Tina was talking about, they'll last longer. And I feel like some people are just, broken. Okay, let's get a new one. Like,
Kind of on that topic, it made me think about, I am so like, oh, it's broken, let me see if I can fix it.
amen. There's that too.
And for a long time, you could actually do that with your phones, your cell phones. Like you could actually get into your cell phone and replace parts and fix it. And so when I finally got a newer Samsung Galaxy, which one was it? I think it was like the 8, and it broke, like the screen shattered on it. I've replaced screens on phones before, so I was like, yeah, no, I can fix this. And then as I'm fixing it, I'm breaking the back of the glass. And I was trying to follow instructions, but I was like, okay, I guess I get a new one. But I had to at least try. I mean, it was the front was pretty shattered. I had to at least try. But it's not very often I come across something that I don't figure out how to fix. So when I do, I'm really like, what is going on? And then come to find out, yeah, you're right. They're building things so you can't fix them.
Yeah, and I even remember my dad saving, like, I think he had like 4 lawnmowers, not counting the one we were using. Every lawnmower we'd had since we lived in that house, he kept, because in case he needed it for something in the future.
Right.
Or in case the new one broke, he had something to replace it with.
Right.
Lawnmowers are like $100, to get a moderately decent one for what we needed. Yeah, we didn't need to keep all those, but he kept them all.
Yep. I would do
bottle,
that.
Yeah, the squeeze bottle tops, from like a squeezy bottle, he'd save all the squeeze tops in case he needed one someday.
So you'll see personality types like that coming out of places where their experiences, so that their life experiences, Ben, you could go without if you're not careful.
Right.
And so, and it can get taken to an extreme. There's other factors that can play into that. And it can lead to hoarding.
Yeah, it can.
And so, and hoarding isn't always what you see on TV. It can be look a lot of different ways. And so, again, it comes back to the why. Why are you doing it? What need is it meeting?
Right. So we've talked a lot about the cultural aspects of our lives and kind of cycle breaking that. What about genetically? And what about those hereditary diseases that you can't run away from necessarily?
Right. I'm a firm believer that despite our genetics, it's a factor. We still have things that we can do and how we approach it, and that is completely unique to each individual. Lori, you have chronic illness, and if you look back over the span of time since your diagnosis, you have tried different approaches in dealing with it. And so sometimes it was informed by your nurture, by your how you grew up. Sometimes it's informed by science and what you know, what the science says about it, and utilizing your faith as an approach. So when we're looking at genetics, in my opinion, nurture still matters,
It does. It does.
and
I
impacts
also
it.
think there's, isn't there that phrase out there? Well, if I go to the doctor, I'm gonna be sick, whatever, right?
Yeah.
My dad uses that one. I wasn't sick until I went to the doctor.
Yeah.
Yes, I wasn't sick until I went to the doctor, and I'm like, my brother, I have a brother, uses that one a lot. He's like, why would I go? They just have bad news to deliver, and I don't need that bad news. I'm just gonna go on ignorantly, blissfully, Again, in this world that we live in, I think that, my boys, on their father's side, and ALS runs hereditarily, mostly in men. Yes, there are women that get ALS, but it is mostly a male thing.
And
Yeah. And they have that to worry about. Their dad had some thyroid cancer. There's a lot of cancer on the boys' dad's side of the family. And there's some just with what we know between my sister and myself, there's some on our side. So, and then I have diabetes, which is definitely, culturally and genetically, passed on. I think that there is this balance that we need to seek when I think it's okay to have that knowledge and have that, so long as it doesn't stop you
right.
from moving forward.
Exactly.
If I don't know, there's so much advancement in science and in technology and culturally that maybe by the time my liver decides to take its dive, whatever that is, there will be some miraculous thing that, and if I had stopped living
Right.
this whole time, when I was originally told I had 2 to 5 years left to live.
Wasn't
Gosh,
that like
what
15 years ago?
Yeah, right? So I think we need to find balance using
Right.
faith, using just some gumption and some courage. And just as a professor once said to me, why would you want to go quietly into that still night? Go raging, go, dive in with both feet and go live life, and I feel like that's what I really try to do is, and not that I haven't had those low points. I had some times in my life where I was so low that I just prayed to God, could I be done? I'm ready to be done. I'm tired. I don't want to keep up this fight anymore. But I'm glad that overall I didn't give in to that. I didn't take my life or stop living or not move forward. And I think that's, we can find out about genetic things like illnesses that we might have, and we can be aware of them. We can be on the lookout, but we can also be about looking for and doing research and praying for and waiting, and knowing that advancements are going to come along that are going to help us. And so yeah, it is a delicate dance that we live.
I think I
Yeah.
think that it can be complicated. So let's take my example of depression, right? So we know a lot about depression. We know that most depression, we can develop ways of coping and, have develop healthy lifestyles to, like if you know that depression runs in your family, you can do life differently. You can learn some resiliency to kind of mitigate the things that life's going to put into your cup. However, there are some disorders where that's not possible, like bipolar or schizophrenia. We know that those are not just managed by coping skills
Right.
and different things like that, resiliency and whatnot. That's actually those things are typically most um, successfully managed with medication. And that is a huge challenge for both of those disorders. And you don't know until you have it that
Right.
you're going to get it. So, yes, stressors can increase the likelihood. And there's other components that can increase the likelihood, but it looks a little bit different. And so,
Yeah.
it's complicated. So families like with heavy schizophrenia in their family are not going to be likely to have the tools available to help the next generation because they
Right.
themselves didn't successfully manage
Mhm.
it, most likely.
Yes.
And so it
Yeah.
is, but if you can, and you get ahead of the game and you're prepared for it, you can help the next generation gain some acceptance and be able to use the tools that are available to them.
Right.
Right. If you're diabetic, you you have to take medications. You have to change the way you eat, whether you're type 1 or type 2. Even
Mhm.
some type 2 diabetics are insulin dependent. You can't change that, but you
Yep.
can
Mitigate it.
mitigate it, yes, and use the tools that we have, the medicines,
Right.
the things. Diabetes isn't going to go away. ALS doesn't have a cure.
Right.
We just watched a show, um, uh, Huntington's. There's no cure for that.
Right.
There's no cure right now for Parkinson's.
Right.
There are ways to mitigate, to help you through,
Right.
but yes, it is different. There are many things we can't do just with the power of thinking positive, or
Right.
whatever. I definitely don't
So,
want to give out
but
that, but
there's also a super importance about acceptance. There's and each individual, each person has the right to make certain choices as long as it's not hurting someone else. Okay. So
amen.
sometimes someone may choose, like if they get a diagnosis of cancer, they may not choose to do treatment. But they in that process they have to gain a certain level of acceptance. They don't have to, but it would be advisable, that they're, and that's what you'll watch certain people do when they make certain choices, and respecting them to make that choice is really important. So yes, the tools may be available and we think someone should, like, oh yeah, get down to that chemotherapy suite, hook yourself up, get on it, right? We're like, fix it, do it. But that person may have a different choice. And so,
And we need to honor and respect those
yes, yes,
and embrace them.
in my opinion,
Yeah.
So, this is a complicated subject and topic, and it has a lot of little tentacles that like spread off into these other sub areas I'm
Yes.
noticing. And
Yes.
so,
Right.
but
You
yeah,
know what?
culture and genetics are both, in my opinion, equally important
Yeah,
in how we're made up and who we are.
it is. And I was going to share, you guys were talking about diabetes and some of those other ones. My mom was diagnosed with diabetes when she was pregnant with me. So my entire life, I grew up in a household where there was no sugared sodas. There wasn't a lot of candy and sweets around. And unfortunately, people look at me and think I never ate well, but I did. I didn't drink. I drank diet sodas, which I know have their own issues since they've learned things. But, you know, I choose, and like I can go to drink a soda and I can tell that it's way too sweet. Like I can tell if it's a diet or not. So I'm grateful for that. That was a culture in my household that is helping me possibly break the cycle, because everybody on my mom's side of the family, my mom included, and even my dad, became diabetics in some time of their life. So there's a very good chance I may become a diabetic, but I'm going to fight tooth and nail from here on out to make sure that that doesn't happen, because I don't want to go through that. But if God forbid I do get diagnosed, I know what I can and can't do. Again, like I also, cancer, they say cancer is not necessarily hereditary, but if you have a lot of people in one side of the family has it, it's a good chance that you may also like experience it at some point. I was terrified to get a pap smear because I did not want to get diagnosed with a cervical or like gynecologic cancer, because that's what my mom had. I was like, so I was terrified. Thankfully, I had one done finally after, like 10 years of the doctors trying to get me to do it. And it was negative. Praise God. So yes. And I feel like, like T, you were saying earlier, like I wasn't sick until I went to the doctor. So that was like, well, if I don't talk about it, I'm not, it's not going to happen. Well, no, that's not quite true. But again, that wasn't, it's the possibility of having it doesn't make me want to live in fear. And I think a lot of people have that like dark cloud hanging over their head all their life. I might get this. And so that really affects their personalities and how they act and react to things. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm grateful for the science and technology advances. And I can't remember the conversation we were having, but my dad said, well, if it wasn't for pigs, your mom wouldn't be alive. I'm like, huh? Well, the insulin she was on at the time was synthetic, made from pigs insulin, because they found that the pig's pancreas, it creates the same type of insulin that a human does almost. So they were able to synthetically manufacture insulin from the genetics of a pig. So if it wasn't for that, my mom wouldn't have insulin to give herself to live, or she would have died. So it was like, okay, so that's the science advancement that, thank God for.
I'm currently migraine free from a drug that was never meant for,
right.
And I'm migraine free, but they were able to make those connections as they were using the drug in a different way. And all of a sudden their patients that had migraines weren't having migraines. And then they were able to do the research and the study. And now it's like a gold standard for migraines, and it had nothing to do with it, So yeah,
a lot.
That's why I think it's important. And I know we've kind of talked around it, but why we don't want to let fears, why we don't want to let a fear of something dictate the way that we go about living our life.
We can let it inform us.
Yes. Inform,
but not rule us.
Yes. And I think that's an important thing of what we're talking about here. We being informed is a good thing, but living in constant fear or dread or complete lack of hopelessness is never good. That's not good. It's not helpful,
right,
for you or anybody else that's around you. So,
amen. And I think this is definitely a topic we'll have to come back to in the future, because I feel like we have a lot more to say. But I think we're going to wrap it up here. So just a friendly reminder that anything discussed in this podcast is not to be used as a diagnosis or a replacement for conversations with your own doctors, therapists, psychologists, or other medical professionals. You can find this episode on YouTube and most major podcast platforms. If you're not a subscriber, we'd love for you to be one. So don't forget to like and click the subscribe button on YouTube to keep up with our upcoming episodes. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as Behind the Mask PC. You can also email feedback and future episode ideas to us at behindthemaskpc@gmail.com. To find us, EJ, Lori, and T online, links for us will be in the description of the podcast. And on behalf of the ladies and myself, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.